She can't even hit the paper target. Did she close her eyes while shooting? A young private burst into laughter as her bullet missed the paper target completely. The entire group of trainees erupted in mocking chuckles. The girl just stood there in silence, head down, collecting her rifle. But the range safety officer wasn't laughing. He stepped forward, checked the bullet trajectory, then whispered with wide eyes, "Check the back wall." The entire shooting range fell dead silent. Her name was Rachel Brooks, 32 years old. Dark brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Blue eyes that seemed to notice everything but reveal nothing. Average height, average build, dressed in standard issue fatigues that looked too big for her frame. She had just been accepted into Fort Benning's logistics support program. The key word here was support. Not combat, not special operations, not even regular infantry. Support. Rachel was the person nobody paid attention to. The one they automatically labeled as non-combat personnel. The kind of recruit who would spend her service life managing supplies, maintaining equipment, and staying far away from anything that resembled actual fighting. And she seemed perfectly fine with that arrangement. Every morning she arrived at the training facility exactly on time. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to draw attention, just on time. She completed every task assigned to her with quiet efficiency. Equipment maintenance, weapons cleaning, inventory management, administrative paperwork. She never complained, never asked questions, never volunteered for anything extra. The other recruits barely acknowledged her existence. To them, she was background noise, a placeholder, someone who would disappear into the massive bureaucracy of military logistics and never be heard from again. The combat trainees were different. They were the ones who mattered. Young men and women with fire in their eyes and steel in their spines. They walked with purpose, spoke with confidence, and trained like their lives depended on it, because someday they would. These were the future warriors, the heroes, the ones who would carry weapons into battle and bring honor to their units. Rachel cleaned their weapons after training. She organized their ammunition. She restocked their supplies. She was invisible to them, just another part of the support structure that kept their world running smoothly. But there were moments when something seemed different about her, like the way she handled firearms during cleaning. Most support personnel treated weapons like dangerous tools they'd rather not touch. Rachel handled them like old friends. Her fingers moved across the components with practiced familiarity. She could disassemble and reassemble an M4 rifle faster than most combat trainees. But that wasn't unusual, right? Support personnel needed to understand the equipment they maintained, or the way she observed during combat training exercises. While other logistics staff chatted or checked their phones, Rachel watched, really watched. Her eyes tracked movement patterns, noted tactical decisions, analyzed formations. But that was just professional interest, right? Understanding how equipment was used in the field, or the way she sometimes paused during her work, head tilted slightly as if listening for something no one else could hear. A distant expression would cross her face for just a moment before she returned to whatever mundane task occupied her hands. But everyone daydreamed during boring work, right? The truth was, nobody really looked at Rachel Brooks. She had mastered the art of being unremarkable. In a world where standing out could mean the difference between life and death, she had chosen invisibility as her greatest weapon. And for 7 years, it had worked perfectly, until the day they decided that even support personnel needed basic marksmanship training. Until the day they handed her a rifle and told her to show the combat trainees how weak logistics really was. Until the day her cover was blown by 5 bullets and a concrete wall. The announcement came during morning formation at Fort Benning, Georgia. All personnel, including logistics support, would participate in basic marksmanship evaluation. No exceptions. Drill Instructor Sergeant First Class Martinez stepped forward, his voice carrying across the parade ground like a whip crack. Some of you seem to think support personnel don't need combat skills. Today, we're going to demonstrate exactly why that thinking is dangerous. His eyes swept across the formation, lingering on the logistics section with obvious disdain. We're going to show our combat trainees what happens when you rely on people who've never held a weapon in anger. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the combat trainees. They understood the game. This wasn't training. This was theater, a public demonstration designed to reinforce the hierarchy. Combat personnel were warriors. Support personnel were, well, support. Rachel stood at attention in the back row, her face revealing nothing. 2 hours later, they were at the firing range. The combat trainees had already completed their qualifications with predictable competence. Tight groupings, consistent accuracy, professional handling. They clustered together near the equipment tables, confidence radiating from their relaxed postures. Now it was the logistics personnel's turn. Brooks, Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the afternoon Georgia heat. "You're up." Rachel stepped forward without hesitation. No protest, no excuse, no request for additional instruction. She simply walked to the firing line and picked up the assigned rifle. That's when the comment started. $20 says she drops it, whispered Private Johnson, one of the combat trainees. "I'll take that bet," replied Corporal Evans. "But I'm betting she doesn't even know which end the bullets come out of. Should have given her a water gun instead," added another voice. Rachel gave no indication that she heard them. She performed her safety checks with mechanical precision, loaded her magazine, and assumed a firing position that looked adequate. Not professional, not trained, just adequate. "Remember," Sergeant Martinez called out, his voice dripping with condescension, "you have 5 rounds to hit that paper target at 50 meters. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." More laughter from the combat trainees. Rachel settled into her stance. She seemed to take forever lining up her shot. Her breathing was controlled but not noticeably practiced. Her grip looked functional but unremarkable. The first shot rang out across the Georgia pine trees. Everyone turned to look at the paper target through their binoculars and spotting scopes. Nothing. No hole in the paper. No mark on the target frame. Nothing. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the laughter exploded. Jesus Christ, she missed the entire target. Did she even open her eyes? I thought support personnel at least knew how to point things in the right direction. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward with theatrical disappointment. "Brooks, that target is 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. It's 50 meters away. How exactly did you manage to miss it completely?" Rachel said nothing. She fired her second shot. Again, nothing visible on the target. The laughter grew louder, more confident. This was going exactly as expected. Third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot. Each time, the paper target remained pristine. Each time, the mockery grew more creative. Maybe she's aiming at the wrong range. Someone should check if she's actually pulling the trigger. I've seen stormtroopers with better accuracy. By the end, even some of the other logistics personnel were shaking their heads in embarrassment. This was worse than anyone had expected. Rachel set down the rifle and stepped back from the firing line. Her expression hadn't changed throughout the entire ordeal. No frustration, no embarrassment, no anger, just that same neutral mask she wore during every other activity. "Well," Sergeant Martinez announced to the group, "I think we've learned something important today about the difference between warriors and—" He gestured dismissively at Rachel. "Support staff." The combat trainees were already turning away. Their entertainment concluded. Some were sharing memes on their phones. Others were making plans for evening leave. The demonstration had served its purpose. That's when Range Safety Officer Staff Sergeant Williams stepped forward. Williams was different from the other instructors. Older, quieter, with the kind of stillness that came from having seen real combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had 3 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star, though he never talked about either. The trainees respected him because he never wasted their time with nonsense. And Williams was staring at something that made his weathered face go very, very pale. He walked past the untouched paper target, past a wooden frame, past the safety barriers, all the way to the concrete wall that served as a range's final backstop. There, embedded in the concrete, at exactly chest height, were 5 bullet holes. Not scattered randomly, not grouped loosely. 5 holes that could have been covered by a quarter. Williams traced the trajectory backward with his eyes, from the wall through the exact center of where a human torso would be if someone had been standing behind a paper target, through the paper target itself, which hung untouched because the bullets had passed through the microscopic gap between the paper and the frame. He turned back to look at Rachel, who was still standing at the firing line with that same neutral expression. Then he walked back to Sergeant Martinez and whispered something that made the drill instructor's face go white. Martinez looked at the wall, then at Rachel, then back at the wall. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely audible. Everyone checked the back wall. Now, the silence that followed was unlike anything Fort Benning had ever experienced. 23 combat trainees, for drill instructors, and a handful of logistics personnel all stood frozen, staring at 5 bullet holes that defied everything they thought they knew about marksmanship physics and the woman standing quietly at the firing line. Private Johnson was the first to break. His cocky smirk melted into something approaching terror. That's not possible. You can't thread bullets through a gap that small. The margin of error alone. Shut up, Johnson, Sergeant Martinez snapped, but his voice carried none of its usual authority. He was staring at the wall, like it might suddenly explain itself. Staff Sergeant Williams walked back to the group, his combat boots crunching on the Georgia clay with measured steps. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen impossible things become real in Fallujah and Kandahar. Ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed something that shouldn't exist. 5 rounds fired through a gap approximately 2 millimeters wide, hitting the exact same point on a concrete wall 50 meters away. He paused, letting the mathematics sink in. The level of precision required for this shot is theoretically achievable by maybe a dozen people on the planet. Maybe. Corporal Evans, still clutching his binoculars, whispered, "Who the hell are you?" All eyes turned to Rachel. She hadn't moved from her position, hadn't changed her expression. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, an unremarkable logistics support trainee who had just somehow demonstrated skills that belonged in the realm of military legend. That's when Colonel Miller arrived. Miller was different from everyone else at Fort Benning. He didn't belong to the training command. He didn't wear standard insignia. He had the kind of quiet authority that came from operations that didn't appear in official records, from missions that were classified above the clearance level of everyone present. He took one look at the bullet holes in the wall, then at Rachel, and his entire demeanor changed. "Clear the range," he said quietly. "Now." "Sir, this is my training exercise," Martinez protested. "I need to understand what just happened here." Miller's gaze could cut steel. "What just happened here is way above your pay grade, Sergeant. Clear the range." It took 15 minutes to move everyone out. 15 minutes of confused mutterings, nervous glances, and theories that range from mechanical malfunction to divine intervention. The combat trainees who had been laughing minutes earlier now looked like they had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Because they had. When the range was finally empty except for Miller and Rachel, he walked over to examine the wall one more time. Then he turned to face her, and for the first time since anyone could remember, Rachel Brooks smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there during 7 months of logistics training. Miller replied, "7 years we've been looking for you. I wasn't hiding." "The hell you weren't." He gestured toward the bullet holes. Ghost Whisper doesn't just disappear from the most classified program in military history and show up cleaning rifles at a basic training facility. The nickname hung in the air like a challenge, Ghost Whisper. In certain classified circles, it was a legend, a ghost story told by special operations personnel who had seen impossible shots made by someone who officially didn't exist. Urban legends of a sniper who could thread needles at 1,000 meters, who could make kills that violated the laws of physics, who had never missed a target that mattered. The stories were always secondhand. Someone knew someone who had served with Ghost Whisper. Someone had heard about the shot that took out 3 targets with a single bullet. Someone had witnessed the elimination that happened from a position that shouldn't have been possible. No one had ever met Ghost Whisper directly, except the people who had worked with her, and they were all dead, missing, or sworn to secrecy by classifications that could end careers and lives. "You were declared Kia 7 years ago," Miller continued. "Black Ops mission in Syria went sideways. Entire team eliminated. No survivors, No recoverable intelligence. No trace of ghost whisper. Rachel's smile grew colder. There were survivors, Marcus. Just not the ones you expected. What happened out there? What happened is that I learned the difference between serving your country and serving the people who give the orders. Her voice carried years of bitter experience. What happened is that I discovered some missions aren't about protecting America. They're about protecting careers, covering mistakes, and eliminating inconvenient truths. Miller studied her face. So you disappeared. I became someone else. Someone invisible. Someone who could clean rifles and stock ammunition and never, ever have to take another shot that I wasn't absolutely certain was right. And now, Rachel looked at the bullet holes in the wall. Now, a bunch of kids who think they're warriors learn that the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one no one pays attention to. She started walking toward the exit, then paused. By the way, Marcus, my file says logistics support, but it doesn't say I'm retired. It doesn't say I'm inactive. It doesn't say I've forgotten how to do the job you trained me for. She rolled back her left sleeve, revealing a small tattoo that had been carefully hidden for months. A ghost wrapped around a rifle barrel, with wispy tendrils that spelled out coordinates. The coordinates of a classified facility that officially didn't exist. The coordinates of the place where Ghost Whisperer had been born. Tell whoever sent you that I'm exactly where I want to be, she said. And if they have a problem with that, they can come discuss it with me personally. Miller watched her walk away, then looked back at the 5 bullet holes that could have been covered by a quarter. Jesus Christ, he whispered to the empty Georgia range. She still got it. But Rachel was already gone, disappeared back into her carefully constructed invisibility, back to her world of inventory sheets and equipment maintenance, back to being someone that no one would ever suspect was one of the most dangerous people alive. The legend of Ghost Whisperer was supposed to be dead, but legends, as everyone was about to learn, are remarkably difficult to kill. 3 weeks after the incident at the Fort Benning firing range, everything had changed. And nothing had changed. Officially, nothing happened. The range report listed a routine marksmanship evaluation with standard results. No mention of impossible shots, legendary snipers, or classified conversations with mysterious colonels. Unofficially, Fort Benning had become a very different place. It started with the combat trainees who had witnessed the shooting. Private Johnson, who had laughed the loudest, now watched Rachel with the kind of nervous respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. Corporal Evans had stopped making jokes about support personnel entirely. Word spread the way it always does in military installations. Quietly, carefully, through networks of trust built over shared experiences and mutual respect. The stories grew in the telling, as stories do, but the core truth remained unchanged. The quiet woman in logistics was someone far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Rachel herself seemed unchanged. She still arrived exactly on time, completed her assignments with methodical efficiency, and spoke only when necessary. She still cleaned weapons, managed inventory, and maintained her carefully constructed invisibility. But now a different kind of attention followed her movements. Range Safety Officer Williams began requesting her assistance with equipment inspections that looked suspiciously like advanced marksmanship consultations. Young instructors who had previously ignored her now asked seemingly casual questions about weapon maintenance that revealed deeper interest in ballistics and accuracy. Most significantly, a select group of elite trainees began receiving anonymous training notes slipped under their barracks doors. Detailed analyses of shooting techniques, corrections for common errors, and suggestions for improvement that demonstrated an understanding of marksmanship that exceeded anything taught in standard curriculum. The notes were never signed, but everyone knew where they came from. Sergeant Martinez, the drill instructor who had orchestrated the original humiliation, found himself reassigned to a desk job processing routine paperwork at Fort Gordon. Williams took over range operations and immediately implemented new protocols that emphasized precision over speed, technique over bravado. A small wooden plaque appeared on the range office wall, professionally engraved with a simple message: check what's behind your target. Sometimes mastery hides where you least expect to find it. When asked about the plaque's origin, Williams just smiled and said it came from someone who understands the difference between shooting and marksmanship. The most dramatic change came in the form of a new unofficial training program. Select groups of special operations candidates began receiving invitations to advanced tactical consultations that took place after regular training hours. These sessions were conducted in a converted maintenance building away from official oversight and curious observers. No records were kept. No attendance was taken. No one discussed what happened during these meetings. But the candidates who attended these sessions began demonstrating remarkable improvements in their shooting scores, their tactical awareness, and their understanding of precision weapons employment. They also developed a profound respect for logistics personnel and an understanding that the most dangerous operators weren't necessarily the ones who looked the part. Colonel Miller returned to Fort Benning twice more over the following weeks, but he never approached Rachel directly. Instead, he observed from a distance, taking notes and making phone calls to numbers that weren't listed in any directory. His reports, filed in databases that officially didn't exist, contained variations of the same basic conclusion. Asset remains in place. Capabilities intact. Status, monitoring but non-interference recommended. Rachel continued her double life with practiced ease. By day, she was an invisible support person that nobody paid attention to. By night, she became something else entirely, a teacher, a mentor, and a reminder that true expertise rarely announces itself. The legend of Ghost Whisper remained officially dead, but legends have a way of adapting, evolving, and finding new purposes. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with wisdom passed quietly from one generation to the next. I never needed applause. I never needed recognition. I never needed anyone to know my name or understand what I was capable of accomplishing. The truth about real mastery is that it doesn't require an audience. It doesn't demand validation. It doesn't need to prove itself to people who wouldn't understand the sacrifice required to achieve it. For 7 years, I chose silence over recognition. I chose invisibility over fame. I chose the quiet satisfaction of competence over the loud celebration of achievement. Because when you've held a rifle in situations where missing means innocent people die, when you've made shots that saved lives in ways that can never be officially acknowledged, when you've carried the weight of missions that exist only in the memories of the people who survived them, the approval of Fort Benning recruits becomes remarkably unimportant. I didn't miss those targets. I hit exactly what I was aiming for. I wasn't shooting at paper. I was shooting at assumptions, at prejudices, at the dangerous complacency that comes from judging people by their appearance, their assigned roles, or their willingness to remain quiet in the face of mockery. Those 5 bullets weren't just demonstrations of marksmanship. They were lessons delivered at the speed of sound. The first lesson: never assume that silence equals incompetence. Some of the most capable people in the world have learned that advertising their skills is often counterproductive to actually using them effectively. The second lesson: the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one no one is paying attention to. Threats that announce themselves give you time to prepare. Threats that remain hidden until the moment of action leave you no time to respond. The third lesson: competence doesn't require external validation. True masters work for their own standards, not for the approval of others. They measure success by impact, not by recognition. The fourth lesson: underestimation is a gift. When people dismiss you, ignore you, or assume you're incapable, they give you the most powerful tactical advantage possible: the element of surprise. The fifth lesson: sometimes the most important shot is the one that teaches rather than kills. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from eliminating a target, but from changing the way people think about targets entirely. I could have hit those paper targets. Perfect center mass, 5 rounds touching, textbook demonstration of basic marksmanship skills. Instead, I chose to hit something more important: the realization that expertise often wears the most unremarkable disguises. Now, every time someone looks at a logistics specialist, a support person, or anyone whose job seems mundane and unimportant, they'll remember 5 bullet holes in a concrete wall. They'll remember that mastery doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and ceremony. They'll remember that sometimes the quietest person in the room is quiet for reasons you should probably take seriously. Don't laugh at the people who miss their targets. Sometimes they're hitting something you can't see.